see 5 o'clock and I see a quorum of council, so I'm going to call this workshop to order. This is the council workshop for Monday, July 22nd at 5 o'clock. Council, there's been an agenda that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda is presented. Will someone move its adoption?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Mures, or seconder, seconded by Councillor Hanson. Prepared to call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded, motion carries. Council, we have no minutes that have been circulated around with this package, and so we're going to go straight into the business of the evening. This is council workshop. This is the start of our sort of a longer budget deliberation process that will extend into the fall, but we want to get ahead of it and have opportunities to hear our vision for how the next budget's going to form up. And so tonight's main presentation by promises of 15 minutes from Rick Daniluk here. So let's see how that goes. All right, Rick, over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good evening, Council and the members of the public listening in. Tonight, staff are seeking direction on the target property tax increase for 2025 and the proposed capital prioritization. As the Mayor mentioned, this is an early step in the 2025 process, and there will be more opportunities for Council to receive updates and provide direction to staff over the next 6 months. Council direction tonight will enable staff to begin developing options to reduce ratepayer impacts currently forecast for next year and to contain capital spending to available funding over the next 5 years. It's prudent for staff to begin this work now so options can be presented with confidence later this fall. As potential increases to Metro Vancouver charges are unprecedented, this work will focus on a 3-year plan, ensuring Council has the best available information, is provided with realistic options, and can adapt as conditions and information continue to change. To that point, we do expect an update from Metro Vancouver in early Q1 of 2025. And with all these things in mind, we do look forward to your feedback so we can begin this important work and bring back options to Council this fall. Next slide. There used to be something there. Which should be on the 3rd slide. The presentation begins with a look at the current financial state and focuses on the operating plan and capital plan before describing the approach to achieving a 3-year financial plan. While recent ratepayer increases have been higher than normal, they've been necessary to maintain service levels and ensure we're investing responsibly in our own infrastructure. And while our approach to financial planning has worked well for a long time, regional and senior government decisions may have significant impacts on our ratepayers in the coming years, and developing a 3-year plan will help Council navigate these upcoming changes. Next slide. When we were in budget deliberations earlier this year in January, we introduced this financial planning framework in anticipation of these new charges that were coming. At that time, Council also asked about the outlook for 2025, and it's lower than the rate that you're seeing in the information today, in today's presentation. So obviously our current state has changed. Although the general trend over the next 5 years is a return to lower levels of inflation, projections now show the district continuing to experience higher rates of inflation, along with managing new risks. Next slide. On the operating plan, cost drivers impacting this budget include the collective agreement settlement patterns emerging in the region. So the current collective agreement was for 2022 to 2024. So we now need to negotiate the next collective agreement. There are also new costs for protective services, and we're working through the latest update from the RCMP, as well as other anticipated cost increases, including the necessary contingency provisions to address emerging risks. We're also identifying risks related to senior government funding and are monitoring TransLink's plans to resolve their structural deficit, which they need to address beyond 2025. Next slide. With respect to Metro Vancouver's charges, a full financial projection for these charges for the North Shore was requested a few years ago. We still don't have all of that information, and we still don't understand the full impacts to our ratepayers related to the latest decisions. Process on the North Shore wastewater treatment plant decision was not fully transparent, and we're still not fully aware of the considerations before the decision was made, nor understand how the plant will ultimately perform, nor its total expected costs on completion of the project. The cost sharing resulting from the May 31st board meeting is inequitable in that we can clearly see the North Shore sewerage area experiencing an increase that's 6.5 times the lowest comparable increase for the same level of service over the same period of time. 3 North Shore municipalities may also experience significant financial constraints over the next 30 years, as debt servicing costs for our sewerage area may exceed Metro Vancouver's own debt limits and restrict our ability to borrow as we consider our debt obligations on a consolidated basis. Now, technically, this is not required. The community charter doesn't require to do that, nor does the JBS&DD Act, but it's something that as a good management practice, of course, you would look at that. So we're working with Metro Vancouver to see what that looks like. They haven't provided all the information, but we should have that information for the upcoming budget process, what our consolidated debt levels look like. So with all this in mind, Council has authorized for further action with respect to these charges, and options are currently being considered. Next slide. While there's been progress on our own capital plan and project delivery continues to improve, cost escalation also continues to add up and will constrain implementation of the remainder of the capital plan over the next 5 years. With this in mind, deferrals are required to continue spending to available funding, or otherwise the available funding would need to be increased. And so there are some options that we can look at there. Next slide. This is a slide that we have not presented in the past, and I think it's helpful. And as we work with engineering on a rolling forecast for capital expenditures, we can replace those blue bars with a forecast rather than a plan. So when looking at this, you can clearly see our delivery capacity improving as we ramped up our investments. And in the yellow there, you can see the capital carryover decreasing. This is the unfinished work that carries over from year to year. There's always an expected amount of unfinished work that carries over, and engineering is clearly decreasing the amount of work that carries over from year to year, which is very good for our cash management. So we'll continue working on that. And looking forward, staff will be updating estimates for the capital plan, which is likely to exceed available funding in the range of $50 million over the next 5 years, or 10% of remaining budget. And so again, we're looking at likely deferrals to stay within funding limits, or looking at ways we might be able to increase the available funding. Excuse me. Next slide. It's a very simple view of the steps that we might take to appropriately put us on a sustainable financial path. This financial planning framework is intended to be applied over a 3-year period. 3 years is the estimated amount of time necessary to develop and implement the changes necessary to put us on that sustainable financial path. As I mentioned earlier, the framework was first introduced in last January and will support the development of the 2025 budget and determine the amount of funding available for the capital plan. Excuse me. Attachment 2 in the report provides additional details on the framework, and the steps are placed in a logical order, with the first step aiming to maintain and adjust service levels as the community grows, the practice that we've been adhering to for a number of years. There are service level improvements planned, including the amount of affordable housing that we've got in the community, the expansion of our active transportation network, as well as improvements to other services, including outdoor recreation. The second step is advocacy, and I see this as a very important STEP and staff are participating in several ongoing initiatives to advance municipal finance reform. Changes here could have significant impacts on our finances, and it's important for us to continue to press forward, but they are outside of our control. So we're looking at our influence in the region and the province to make change. Third step, we're seeing obviously risks and costs increase, so mitigating the risks and leveraging opportunities to reduce costs are important. We're also looking at generating new revenue, and those will be a big focus area for us as we develop options for council. Some reductions to service levels will likely be required, and staff will focus on opportunities with the lowest impacts in the community when those changes are brought forward. The fourth step is about getting direction from council, so we're able to aim for the appropriate options and bring them back to council. It's the goal of this workshop, is to get some direction, preliminary direction on what council would like us to come back with. This framework will be used to bring back information to council and ensure it has the best available information for decision making throughout the budget process. Next slide. There's a little bit of repeat in here. But I thought it was important to just clearly spell out what we can do specifically to assist the ratepayers and reducing their impacts. So in the near term, as mentioned, we'll focus on opportunities to generate revenue and reduce costs, as well as set aside funds to mitigate risks. We plan to hold that at current levels until we have better information on the impacts from Metro Vancouver's charges. So there's debt within the 5-year plan. There's no plans to change that debt until we have better information. The third bullet there, we can smooth rate increases through the use of reserves. We have done that in the past. We are intending to do a little bit of that with the Metro Vancouver charges, as we've accumulated some reserves for that purpose over the years. And we can look at that again for this 3-year period to smooth out impacts. We can also improve the information we're sharing with the public on the available provincial programs to ensure that they have the latest information on those options. So there's many ratepayers familiar with the property tax deferral program, and there's another program that residents may not be familiar with. It's the special assessment program, where they can elect to have their single family home valued based on its current use, rather than a future or a use that would be impacted by the potential development on the property. So
if you've been in it for 10 years.
If you've been in it for 10 years, exactly. So that's an option we have not been actively sharing updates on. It's something that we should, especially now with the transit-oriented areas and some properties impacted there. So just another way that we can assist the residents and help them reduce their impacts. Next slide. This slide shows property tax increase options developed by staff based on the current forecast for next year. The first option focuses on maintaining service levels and simply flowing through impacts from uncontrollable cost increases. The estimated increase of 7% is based on best available information today and may be higher or lower when we come back in the fall. There's a number of assumptions built into that estimate. First up, the second option makes use of reserves to stabilize impacts over the next 3 years, but does not look at mitigation strategies. The benefit of this option is it enables continuation of current practices while still reducing impacts in 2025, while we continue to gather additional information. The third option requires staff to develop mitigation strategies to reduce increases over the next 3 years, including some reductions to service levels. Option 3 provides council more flexibility to mitigate impacts on our ratepayers, but may require some difficult decisions. With this in mind, staff recommends developing scenarios on how the property tax increase could be reduced, using option 3 as a target. And with that, I'd like to pass it back to the mayor for a discussion on the affordability targets for next year's budget.
Thank you very much, Rick, for your presentation. Can you just refresh me in our 5-year financial plan, what were future years projected to be in terms of taxation increases?
In the current bylaw, the 2025 year was planned at 5%, and then it trailed off according to inflation, based on whatever we were.
5, 4.
Yeah, I think it was 5. Yeah, 5, 4, 3. I think was the.
So 26 was 4.
Pretty sure. Yeah. We had.
So we're not reducing it, we're doing what was in the plan. If you do option 3, you're not actually reducing, you're doing what was in the financial plan. Is that correct?
Financial plan was at 5 for next year. Option 3 is 1% lower.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. Just my own comments on the matter. I'm definitely in support of option 3 for the gate. And it comes with even more challenges than just hitting 4%, because we've got to be able to find a way to do it without reducing planned maintenance on our facilities, making sure that if there are major service changes that we talk about them publicly for a long lead up time so people understand what changes in services are going to occur. We have to do it in an environment where the municipal CPI is not the same as the CPI for the general public. General public's at about 2.7%, but that's for an average citizen's basket of goods. Our basket of goods is very different, and it's producing a much higher rate, particularly being driven by construction costs. And so we have to do it in an environment where our construction bills are coming back 30 and 40% higher than they were projected to be 2 years ago. Lots of these construction capital projects that are coming online now we're actually committed to in the 2023 budget. And so since that time, their price tags have been going up by that 30%. And so either you need to do 30% less, or you need to find savings in other parts of the organization, or you need to delay projects and reprioritize work. I don't want it to come at the expense of properly maintaining the existing infrastructure that we have. Some municipalities delay planned maintenance, and unfortunately, it sometimes leads to the downward spiral and not getting the full life value out of their facilities. I don't want to go that direction. I want us to properly maintain our facilities and get the maximum life out of them. But I do recognize that we need to help our taxpayers. They're getting hammered on at every turn. The Metro Vancouver costs that are coming their way are compounded from every single function of Metro Vancouver. Your utility bills going up, your sewerage bills going up, the solid waste bill, the water bill, like they're all going up dramatically. And in part, it's because they're even more heavily weighted on construction contracts than we are, and therefore they're feeling that 30% pinch very dramatically across their whole organization. All of this at the same time as our federal government has been devaluing our currency by spending a tremendous amount of money and then not collecting it back through taxation, instead collecting it by printing new money. And that has created a situation where the money that we're spending on capital, a dollar ain't worth what it used to be. It's when you have $60 billion in new spending, that's 3,000 spending for every single house in Canada. And you have to make that up somewhere, or it's going to be by printing new money and devaluing the currency. And so we're doing all of this under that environment where our purchasing power of our dollars is decreasing. And then on top of that, we also have the localized issues of it's getting more and more challenging to commute to the North Shore for work. And the workers that are coming here are having to drive past 100, 150 construction sites along the way. And so it's more attractive to take positions up at those closer destinations. And so we have an even more competitive environment for that kind of labor. So I know it's a tall order and a tall task, but I think we have to dig deep on this one and do our best to, at the very least, hit option 3, which is 4%. My actual preference would be getting us back to the historical numbers of about 3%. One question I had on that is really talk about the capital fund. The actual, since 2004, we've been putting away 1% on reserves for replacement of existing capital. Here, are you talking about 4% plus 1 or 3% plus 1?
It's 3 plus 1.
Yeah. So I just want to be clear about that. So option 4 or option 3 is not, it's a 3% tax increase with 1% for replacement of existing capital.
That's
in
correct.
our system. Okay. Great. Thank you. That's my comments. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, before I give some comments, I'd like to just ask a couple of questions. In the option 2, which is the 5% rate smoothing, you're talking about drawing off reserves to get there. Now, does that actually mean that at the end of 3 years, we're leaving the district in worse financial shape because our reserves are less robust?
It's a limited application of reserves over the first couple of years. By the time we get to year 3, we should have the ongoing. It'll be smoothed out, and the 5% would sustain.
But will the district have the same amount of resources at the end of 5 years, or 3 years, I should say? Or are we talking about depleting those resources by drawing off reserves in order to maintain the 5%?
You would deplete those resources, but a limited amount of resources over the first couple of years.
And then, okay, thank you. By limited amount, do you have some sense of what that number, your target number is?
Yes, it would likely be in the $3 to $4 million range to smooth it out.
Okay, thank you. And then I was intrigued by the mention in the report and also in your presentation about additional revenue. What are you thinking of there?
There's been a number of ideas generated around new revenue, building off of the current practices. One, where we're not actually generating an appropriate cost recovery, going to market with some of our charges where appropriate, while still protecting local residents. There are policies that other municipalities are looking at, including sponsorship policies. There's additional revenues in virtually every area that, and every director or GM that I've had conversations with as it seems to be the one that generates the most ideas
Is the new revenue?
Yes.
I'm ready to thank you. I prefer option 2. I think 5% over 3 years is reasonable and represents an appropriate balancing of the priorities and the work that the district does as against the need to maintain responsible finances. In the fullness of time, I do think we need to get back to the 3%, the inflation plus 1%. I support including the 1% for infrastructure. So when we're talking about 5%, we're really talking about 4%. I definitely don't want to see another 7% tax increase. I don't believe that local government taxation is a good vehicle for that type of tax increase, that it can impose an onerous burden on some. Obviously sensitive to the metro utilities, because even if we hold our tax increases to 5%, the tax bill receiving our residents will be more than that, probably more like 7%. I do support the capital prioritization framework, but at the same time, that's very general. And before we start cutting or deferring or putting off projects, that we are going to have to consider them on a project by project basis. I would be more comfortable, by the way, if the 5% over 3 years didn't draw off $3 or $4 million in reserves. So I would be most comfortable with 5%, make it work somehow, 5% over 3 years, with the plan that at the end of that, we leave the district in as good shape as we found it financially in terms of reserves, and that from there on in, we're talking about inflation plus 1% going forward, and we don't mind that inflation is 2%. Those would be my comments. Thank you very much.
Got Councilors Back and Councilor Pope. Councilor Back.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm just traveling at the moment and having some connection issues.
We can hear you clearly here, Jordan.
Okay, I'll leave my camera off and hopefully that'll help a little bit. Thank you very much, Mr. Daniluk, for the presentation. For me, I don't want to see a 7% tax increase again either. I've talked to enough residents to know that they don't see that level of tax increase also. However, when we look at the options that are presented in the report, it's option 3 that concerns me the most. That involves some significant cuts to projects which have been planned for some time. Many projects that have been deferred a number of times, and I don't want to see them deferred again. So I think option 3 is going too far. My position is very similar to Councillor Hanson's. I would like to see us in that 5% range with a long-term goal of getting that increase down even further. But I'm certainly more comfortable with 5% than I am with 7%. And I'm also more comfortable with that than I am, seeing some of these major projects cut. And I know how challenging this environment has been over the last, couple of years. But I really was, hoping to see some of these inflationary pressures come down next year, and I think a lot of our residents are as well, which is why I'm not comfortable with 7% tax increase again. I appreciate that Councillor Hanson asked about what are some of the ideas for generating new revenue, because this is an area that I'm interested in as well. I know that sponsorship is not necessarily an easy thing to talk about sometimes when we're talking about public assets, but I think that the district should look at creating a sponsorship policy for some of our facilities. There's a whole spectrum of what sponsorship looks like in a community, but there's certainly some very good examples of where it can work well and where it can generate a lot of revenue. So I've actually been working on some ideas to bring forward around that, but that's an area that I'm interested in exploring. I also think when it comes to the film industry, maybe there's more opportunities we could be generating revenue there. I recently had a meeting on that topic with our staff. So I think that we need to start getting more creative than ever about how we look for new revenue opportunities within the municipality. We can't keep going back to taxpayers and expecting that they're going to appreciate these kinds of increases. But recognizing this is a very challenging task to take on, and this is a very preliminary look. Those are just sort of my initial thoughts, and I know that there's still lots of uncertainty, of course, with Metro Vancouver. So those are just sort of my first comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pope.
Thank you very much. In the report, it says $50 million in project deferrals or cancellations are likely required. So where does that fall in each option? Would option 1 require $50 million in project cancellations, option 2 or option 3?
The options in the financial planning framework determine the amount of funding available for the capital plan. And currently, if I think about it, all 3 options essentially maintain the same level of funding for existing capital. There's 1% for infrastructure included in all 3 options. The debt levels are at the same, so there's no additional borrowing in either option. And other funding that we've talked about with council, like development charges, are the same. So it's not a big difference in terms of available funding to the capital plan through those 3 options. But on council's focus, there could be. If, for example, we focused on revenue generation and earmark that specifically for capital, then we could be increasing the amount of funding available.
Makes absolutely no sense to me. I'm sorry. Can anyone else explain it?
Well, the way capital works is it's generally ongoing funding that's set aside so we can make these investments. And so so all 3 options maintain our existing infrastructure and generally focus on reducing the tax levy impact. That's the purpose of that framework. The second framework which was around capital prioritization, then proposes with that available funding, how might we stay within that available funding? We can have a conversation as well around making sure that we develop options to generate additional revenue for capital if council chooses.
Can somebody put that in clearer
I
terms?
think Catherine's asking about specific projects, but on each of these plans, which specific projects will not proceed on.
Like, how do you get from 7 to 5, that 2%? What's happening with the 2% is what she's asking.
Between 7 and 5, there's
2% difference. So if we said go out and do a 5%, what
Yeah.
would we lose if we went to 5?
there's nothing on the table between 7 and 5. It's simply smoothing. So instead of going from 7 and then all the way down to 3, you're going to have 5, 5, and 5. So the total increase over the 3 years would be the same, but you're choosing to smooth it.
Right now it's 5, 4, and 3.
Right now, it looks like 7 as without doing anything. It looks like 7, and then it's 5 and 3. That's what the numbers are telling us. It adds up to 15 under option 1. Under option 2, it still adds up to 15% over 3 years, and it's 5, 5, and 5. But under option 3, the council is giving us direction that that's too high, and that you want us to reduce the 3-year impact. And under that option, it's 4, 4, and 4, or 12%. So
Predominantly, the difference between option 1 and option 2 is that you're using your reserves or your plan, you're pushing some of that debt out to the future, or that loss out to the future.
that's right. Yeah, we're simply stabilizing under option 2.
So option 1 or option 2, we would maintain all of the current items that are in the budget that we approved earlier this year.
There are two different conversations, the level of taxation and the capital plan. That's just the way it is. We have an operating plan that's tax funded. That operating plan makes contributions towards capital. And so the first decision is how much of a tax increase would council support? The second decision is if we were looking at the capital prioritization, we're seeing approximately $50 million in deferrals. If council wants us to identify additional funding for that plan, we can.
Sorry, that's which option?
So they're
What I'm trying to get at
Yeah,
here is if your report clearly says $50 million in project deferrals or cancellations are likely required
yes.
for that. So that's what is required if we
Yes.
maintain a tax level of what?
We're asking council for direction on two things tonight. One is the level of property taxation, and 2 is the capital prioritization framework. If we're focusing on the second thing, capital prioritization, council could give us direction to explore opportunities to increase the level of funding for that plan. And it wouldn't necessarily be through taxation, it would be other means.
But to be clear to Catherine's question, option 1 would not contemplate reducing or deferring out $50 million worth of projects.
Option 1, even at a 7% property tax increase, still has that limited funding available for capital. So I would suggest that we just decouple those two things for a moment and first focus on the level of property taxation, so that because there are different adjustments that staff need to make.
But we can't decide what level of taxation we want or need if we don't have facts surrounding what things cost.
We do know what things cost, and the estimates are just to maintain what we have in the operating plan. We're seeing a 7% increase, just to maintain what we have in the operating plan.
That's exactly what I'm asking. So it has to be 7% to keep what we've previously gone through for budget expenditures. So the ATFs, the active transportation. No, what?
No, so in the operating budget, we're just talking about ongoing annual expenses with set amounts to fund the capital plan. They are two separate conversations. You could combine them. But it makes more sense to me for council to separate them.
It's not making any sense to me, and I guarantee you, if it's not making any sense to me, it doesn't make any sense to many members of the public. I'm not
So-
saying that this, I admit that this is an area where, you know, I am not knowledgeable when it comes to accounting and budgets,
Well, I can combine them.
but I'm trying.
I could combine them. So a 1% increase is gonna get you $10 million in borrowing, if you wanted to do that. And if we're 50 million out, then that's 5%. Now we're at 12. But that's not the approach that I'm recommending. I'm recommending that we look at the property tax level unmitigated.
You can't separate them. You can't have one without the other in an accountant's world. And your level of expertise, you can, and maybe for certain members of council. you can.
Counselor, I think you're right that it's hard to explain. You're flipping it in a way that doesn't make logical sense. You usually would tell the public, look, we have all of these commitments, and if we want to maintain all of these commitments and do all of the things we committed to, this is the number.
And what is that number?
Rather than saying, you tell me what number you want, and I'll tell you how damaging it's gonna have to be. It would be, it's more logical for us to approach it from the position of, you know, I mean, your own thing, first finish what we started, then fix what's already exists. Like our own rubric for it sort of suggests the same logical pattern, that we're going to say, all of the things that we've committed to, what would it cost for us to continue? Recognizing that the costs have escalated enormously, and the tail has been building from year to year to year, and we have no plan to recover, and we're just adding to the tail.
Maybe we could bring that slide up, because my intention was to simply focus on tax levy increase first and then shift to, but let's bring up that slide and I'll just quickly discuss that. And we can have a better idea about what that capital prioritization framework
Would do off the top of your head, or,
sorry?
you know, the number of the slide off the top of your head?
Let's see here. It's slide 12. Next slide. Okay. So the capital prioritization framework is intended to guide updates to the capital plan. As you saw previously in the presentation, you can see how while we're getting better with project delivery and we're reducing the carryover, there will, with the latest information on construction costs, as you were mentioning, Your Worship, things are costing much more than they have, and we're updating that forecast, and it looks like about $50 million in projects will need to be deferred. That doesn't mean that they're not going to proceed, it just means that it's taking longer to do them within the available funding. Now, the key words there are available funding. The first part of the workshop talked about how the outlook for the property tax increase look next year, and that does impact available funding. The thing is, any one of those options, the way I've laid them out, does not adjust the available funding unless we get direction from council to tie those things together. Now, the framework prioritizes completion of work already underway for good reason. There's a lot of risks with discontinuing work. There's extra costs. And so completing what we've started is number one. We have a long history of looking after our infrastructure. It's worth almost $4 billion in the latest updates from the engineers. making sure that we're investing in core infrastructure is incredibly important, and that's what priority 2 does. Priority 3 looks to maintain service levels. It says here to upgrade what already exists, and what that does is maintain our service levels as the community grows. And so we would need to expand our inventory related to our as the community grows. And then the last priority simply looks at improving service levels. So reaching for some of those performance targets that council wants us to achieve. In this prioritization framework, it places that last. Because we want to finish what we've started, we want to look after our existing infrastructure, and we want to make sure that the community continues to enjoy the service levels that it already has today. So it's only logical to leave that last investment after the first 3. And our funding in the capital plan is currently limited. We're not recommending increasing debt. We have presented council with changes to development charges that will likely improve the funding available. We're recommending continuation of the 1%. That'll also help with our financial flexibility. But otherwise, there's no additional funding available in the capital plan at this stage. The opposite may be true. As assumptions on senior government grants start to shrink, and new information comes in on that. And so we're just trying to be as prudent as possible and say, this is the amount of funding that's available for capital. Let the staff, if that prioritization framework makes sense, let staff go through and apply that framework and give staff direction to look for options to increase available funding for the capital plan. But again, in my mind, and maybe it's just my mind, but in my mind, it's first, what's the level of affordability that we're searching for? And then second, it's applying this framework to stay within available funding, to search for opportunities to increase that available funding.
The difference that we have from our perspective is that we're not trying to figure out what the community can afford. We're trying to figure out the minimum that we need.
Yeah.
And the two may be different. And so that's the challenge at coming at it from the other angle and saying, well, yeah, everybody's had a pretty good year. You know, the houses went up a few percent in value and stuff. Therefore, we could probably afford this. And working from that point, I think it's a lot easier for us as politicians to come from the perspective of you coming and telling us this represents full maintenance of all of our assets and continuing on with our plan. This represents maintaining our assets, but deferring some of our plan. And this represents the deep cuts, not maintaining our assets and not maintaining our current plan. Right? That's an easier way for us to come at it politically, because then you're saying what's needed to achieve this objective. Anyway, I'm going to continue going around the table just to see what other perspectives pop up. But Councillor Murray, Councillor Back, I see your hand there, and Councillor Mock.
What was the increase in 2020? So I'm asking for 2020 up to 2024. That's what I need to understand. So if somebody can look for that number for me while I ask some other questions. Thank you. So I would automatically go to option 3 as the mayor would, because I think we have to live within our means. But I do think the way it's being presented is a little bit confusing. And I think partly the reason why it's confusing is because you want us to give you a number and then staff go back and figure out how to do that. And I want to know, because I don't know. And I've been saying this for a while. You guys know, we don't know. These policy documents that we have saying we want to do this and we want to do that is what's driving these costs. And it may be a priority for staff to finish what we started, but how many dollar signs are attached to finish what we started? I do not want any more surprises. I've had enough. The Seymour's had enough. If we're looking at the Seymour's had quite enough surprises lately, and we need to calm down, and people need to breathe, and I need to stop managing Facebook wars on issues that have been implemented and not clearly laid out for the community to understand. I'm okay with bringing a scenario to the community and then bringing it to council for council to decide what direction we're gonna go in. But I feel like there's a bunch of directions we're going in, and I'm gonna have to continue to deal with Facebook wars because there's gonna be some surprises and it's not gonna be where I thought we were going. So this is part of the problem. Last year in the budget, there was a term that said maintain service levels. You and I talked about this, didn't we? Yeah. So what that meant to me was quite different
That's true.
what it meant to you. And when I hear the term maintain service levels, I'm like, well, we're gonna make sure the water runs down the sink properly, the drain's not clogged. That's maintaining service level. We're gonna mow the lawn. We're gonna make sure that the fire hydrants work, right? That's what maintaining service levels means to me. But what it meant to you was maintaining service levels on the implementation of the OCP.
Absolutely.
And that is quite different in my mind. And this is where we're running into a problem. Now, I have Mackay done in my head right now, going, let's look at line by line budgeting. And I do not want,
Good, nice.
yeah, but I do want to go to the must, should, nice. And I think we need to go back there. Because, you know, I said this at Metro too. I'm like, I said there's one guy in the room that knows everything. And he's sitting up at the front. There, you know, we did not have all the information we felt we needed to go forward in the direction that we were going in. And the board continues to say this. And I think, you know, some of us are saying that here. So what your priorities are, what staff priorities are, I need to understand what those are too, because we're the ones that are putting up our hands and making the decision here. And we're a bit in the dark. It's very, you know, things have changed in these budgets, the complexity of our OCP, the speed at which things are happening, the policies that we've been implementing. And, you know, we talk about active transportation, and there's some great opportunities for active transportation. There's also some active transportation that has not been very popular. There's also some active transportation that is not shifting the mode. And we have to understand all of that in order to make the decision. There's 7 of us. We'll put our hands up, the decision will fall where it may, but we still need to understand as we go forward what all that means. And we don't. And that's the problem with decoupling this and the way that it's been presented. Did we get those numbers on 2020?
You didn't bring my laptop.
Do you have them?
No,
Oh, you don't have them?
I don't.
Do you know, well, if you, I'm gonna test you. What were you in? I can't remember. What was 2020? 3.5? Mike?
I think it was 2.
Oh my God, 2. Okay, what was
It
2021?
was COVID years, yeah.
So what was it?
Oh, cheers.
I also thought it was 3 with no asset uplift.
Okay, so 2, 3, what was 2022? You guys, come on.
So the general,
3.5?
the general formula that's been followed is just whatever the
Okay,
CPI,
so 2,
less than
3,
1%.
2, 3, 3.5, and 2023 was 5.25. And then 7. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. 5 years, it's gone from 2 to 7. Those projects have been deferred longer than 5 years, many of them, if we go back into the list. A lot of those projects have been put off for multiple years. So it's not because of the increase, it's because there's a multitude of reasons. There's a multitude of reasons why they've been deferred. Deferred because council changes direction on something. Deferred because we bring another project in and something gets bumped. Deferred because we don't get, you know, prices come in and they're way too high. There's all sorts of reasons why we don't go ahead with projects. I think council has been needing to understand for a number of years more than what we get during this budget process. You're the new CFO here, you've been here for a long time, as long as I have, and you get to run the show now. I need to see more of what these projects are about. What does it mean? Show me what it means, finish what we've started. What have we started? What's coming? I've asked. I've asked engineering, I've asked you tonight, I want to know what's coming this year in projects, because I don't want any more surprises. I don't want to have I feel like I'm having a stroke sometimes when I drive down a road and something's changed, or I start getting people calling me going, what the heck's going on? So I want to know what it means to fix what already exists. What does that mean? How many dollar signs are attached to that? Upgrade, what does that mean? Fix and upgrade? I think those words are kind of the same. In the thesaurus, I think that's the same. Maybe Councillor Pope might be able to confirm that. Lastly, expand our inventory. Well, I think, you know, we've got enough challenges right now. I'm not sure if we can expand, but there's been some commitments made. There's been some discussions about infrastructure that we would like to look at. And that's going to be you know, council will make that decision as well. But I think we need a lot more information about this, and you need to give us some examples.
Mr. Down?
I want to just thank you for your comments. I agree with you that we can improve the information that we're sharing in the 5-year financial plan, and particularly around the capital budget and the work that's presented. The prioritization framework I would suggest is a good best practice approach. It uses language that is in place with leading organizations. That's consistent with Asset Management BC. There's lots of organizations that don't have definitions, but these are the appropriate definitions.
And that's fine. I just need examples to go along with.
So when it comes to work already started, it's generally projects.
I want a little bit more than you just like sort of filling in the gaps on 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I'm asking for is I need information to come back, not
sure.
just sort of a generality,
Sure.
right? And I think council would be interested in that, and I think the community would be interested in that too, because as the mayor says, then we can kind of justify where we're going, right? We can give that information to the community when we're talking about these increases. So that's what I'm looking for to come back.
Definitely do that. And just for context on the floor, the body of work under our existing assets is in the range of $45 million a year. We've measured that it'll take more, and that's why we continue to add that 1% for our deficit. And the body of work under number 3 is the next highest level of investment. So just for context, we can definitely bring back additional information and make it clearer.
Or we'll just come to you.
Councillor Back, is your hand up from before?
Yeah.
Nope.
Okay, all right, I'm gonna go to Councillor.
Councillor Ma's not spoken, so yeah, go ahead.
Councillor Ma, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Back. I want to thank staff for the foresight of bringing this forward now. It's a challenging environment in terms of financial matters for both the district, but also for the families. Notwithstanding strategies that you outlined to, reduce impact on ratepayers and some revenue generating ideas, I think we need to be proactive now. To be prudent and to take into account the projected increases that's going to come from the wastewater treatment plant, and keeping in mind, I believe there's usually 2 times during the year that there's budget adjustments, and for the most part, those are increases. I would like to see staff now come up with ideas on how to keep our increases as low as possible. I would like some clarification on option 3, the mitigation strategies. If I recall properly, during the last budget cycle, when we were hitting these 7%, I think I recall there wasn't enough time to look at cuts. And I actually appreciate what you're trying to do now by asking council to give direction on a target, because that's the political side. Whether it's 5% or 7%, that matters to our families. So I would like to have options now, kind of knowing where cuts may come from, and then let council decide during the budget review process in early spring whether we actually implement those cuts. Just because you identify them, correct me if I'm wrong. If we go with option 3 and you come up with mitigation strategies, if we don't like those, can council at that point say, okay, well, we won't go with the 4, we'll go with the 5 because we want this project so badly to go ahead. Can we at that point Is there anything stopping us from doing a 5%? I wouldn't think so.
No, it's very early in the process, and as you mentioned, we've done that on purpose. There's more consultation required when you do an approach like this, where you're impacting services. The direction we're seeking is that we come back with scenarios to reduce ratepayer impacts, which could be a balanced approach, looking at both new revenue and minor reductions in service, or you can go either side, more revenue or more reductions to service levels. So those are the types of scenarios that we could bring back to you.
And I think that's great, because I want to have options. I don't want to be forced between a 5 to 7% and not be able to really have time to look at the impact, like when we, do it in April or May, like, we're running up against the deadline. So I appreciate staff doing that now. So I would support option 3 to identify strategies now. Doesn't mean that we are stuck on 4%. And I will also support the capital framework. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Back, did you have additional comments?
Well, thank you. I just wanted to thank Councillor Pope for kind of highlighting how unclear this information is being presented. I recognize that we typically don't have a conversation about what we want the tax increases to be this early, but there typically is more connection to the tax increase and the capital plan, and so I'm finding that it could be clear as well, because I thought from reading the report, the point that I read very clearly was that $50 million in projects would have to be deferred or canceled. So, yeah, I look forward to, I guess, having more conversations with more detail added in terms of the framework as well. I mean, when you look at the 4 sort of levels in the framework, finish what we've started. I mean, we started, I guess, as you've said, sort of well underway, under construction, but what about what we've promised? And I think there's some very clear sort of projects that have been promised, that have been pushed off, that we, many of us don't want to see happen again. So I'm looking for this to come back with more detail with each of the priorities in the framework, and just a presentation with a greater connection to the capital plans, so we can make a more educated decision. I find tonight it's kind of like going and going to make a big purchase and being told, well, what's your budget? Well, our budget, you want to spend as little as possible. And I think we none of us want to come in and say, well, yeah, we want the tax increase to be 7%. We're always trying to, keep it as low as possible while still delivering on everything that we promised the community. So, yeah, I just want to say that I think it could have been a clearer presentation with more detail, and I hope that that's what is coming in the.
Councillor Hanson, sorry, go ahead. Mr. Dowell, do you have additional comments?
Thank you, Your Worship. And through to Councillor Back, we can definitely make it clear the relationship between the taxation and capital plan and in the next update. As the easiest way I can explain it is there is ongoing funding built into the financial plan, and as one-time funding dries up, then we have that remaining as our limit, and so that's why the capital prioritization is working towards that limit, especially in an environment where we're not looking to increase taxes, but we're looking to decrease taxes. So, but we can definitely do a better job explaining the relationship between those two things, and so council has a better understanding of that.
Thank you. Councillors Hanson and Pope.
Thank you.
Thank you for everyone's participation and questions, and very useful, very interesting. Just coming back to the 50 million referral. So there's $50 million that we're pushing down. At current interest rates, I heard you say that we could fund that with 5%. 1% is $10 million.
Generally speaking.
So I think that is useful to put on the table, because I don't think there's any upside to the 12% tax increase. So we're going to have to talk about deferring something. I don't think anybody at this table is interested in a scenario whereby that $50 million is addressed now. So I just put that out there that to some degree you're forced to go with a plan that fixes a number and then pushes off capital spending. Because we're not in a range of critical. Thank you.
Well, everyone wants lower taxes and we should work towards that. But not at the expense of community priorities. And as Councillor Back has stated, not at the expense of what this council has promised. And this community will be outraged if after fighting for all of these things through the last 2 budgets, we suddenly say, no, we want to keep taxes at 4%. And so Hansworth, sorry, you can't have that ATF you were promised. Inter River Park, you can't have that ATF that you were promised. No, sorry, we're canceling that active transportation project. No, we don't care about seniors keeping active and building more pickleball courts for the future. We're going to ignore all of that because we need to keep taxes artificially low because of the fiscal conservatism that has dominated this council for years. So all I want to know is what projects are likely to be deferred or canceled. That's what we need to know before we can move forward on any option 1, 2, or 3. It is not reasonable to ask this council to make those kinds of decisions when we don't have any information here.
Your worship, through Councillor Poe, we're not asking council to make decisions today. We're asking for guidance on a prioritization framework that would allow us to bring back options. We're not looking at deferral of all of this promised work. We're looking at applying the framework, updating the forecast, and coming back to see what can be accomplished within the available funding. So that work needs to happen. And we can certainly look at other options to increase the available funding if council wishes.
The available funding is all about whether it's going to be 7%, 5%, or 4%. And I think everyone around this table we may have different priorities and goals, but we're all saying we need more information to make those decisions. And they are decisions. The guidance that we give here is our decisions we're making about priorities. And you're going to be using that to formulate, updates and further iterations of the budgets in the fall. So it's very important right now that we clearly articulate what's on and what's not. And I can tell you that I am not going to agree to anything. This community does not want a reduction in service levels. Hundreds of people from this community wrote to us and came to us during 2023 and said, these are the things we want. And I will never forget the one woman who came and said, I want to pay more tax because I want to have these amenities in my community.
I've got Councillors Ma and Murray.
From my perspective, we're not making decisions tonight. We're giving some guidance. We want to know what our options are. We're going to make decisions at budget time. And those are where we make tough decisions. We all have priorities. I don't want to get into specifics, but the discussions that we had 2 years ago, I hope we can keep those commitments. The thing that's really changed, our costs are up, and the wastewater treatment plant, we would not be responsible if we didn't take it into account. I'm not saying this because of that, we're gonna put off doing fields or courts or whatever we decided, but we need to make those decisions. We need some information, and that's what we're asking staff to do, is come back with options. I think what they're gonna do is the right plan. We shouldn't berate our staff right now for coming with options and saying, hey, there's some problems down the road. We need to look at it now instead of being forced to make a decision in 2 weeks. I'd rather have that time to think about it when staff comes back with options.
Well, I just think it's unfortunate that, this is the first budget meeting. So, there's a lot of discussion coming. There's a lot of presentations that are going to be made, and we're going to have a lot more opportunity to share our perspectives with staff and the community. And the assumptions that are being made is unfortunate. I really believe that. I really believe that suggesting that things are going to happen before the information, as Councillor Moss pointed out, has even come forward is an unfortunate statements made during a workshop. And, but that's just experience. And we need to understand this process, and staff are going to be a bit challenged this year to bring all of this information forward in a clear and concise way. And then ultimately some decisions will be made. So I want to thank staff too for your work. It's a very challenging time. I think there is all sorts of different people that have different abilities to pay. Affordability is a different word to everyone. And I don't think any of us have the ability to suggest that we know the perspective of every single resident and business in this community, because we don't. So I think we just need to take a deep breath, have some patience, ask the questions to staff. And I would certainly encourage everyone, and the community included, to reach out to staff whenever you need to have a question answered or you're confused about something, because they're at our disposal to do that. And I think Mr. Daniluk and his team have heard our concerns. And I'm certainly going to be making an appointment with Mr. Daniluk and his team to spend the day downstairs. It'll be fun. I'll bring lunch, and we can go over these budgets and talk about my perspective and the people, the perspectives I believe that are out there in the community. So no decisions have been made on anything. You've heard around the table our perspective on this. Councillor Forbes is not here tonight. I'm sure she's going to share her perspective. And with that information, I'm sure you're going to bring us back something else the next time.
I actually, I know that come into this a little earlier than we normally do in the process, and so it's a bit of a learning experience. I appreciate the opportunity to get in early and talk about it. I think Councillor Back said it well. I'll take it one step slightly further than what he said. It's like you walk onto the car lot and the salesman, after pleasantry, says, what can you afford versus, what do you need? And the feeling with what can you afford is always going to feel like you're going to be disappointed with what they offer, and that's always going to be the lowest point. They're always going to push you up from that point as well. And if you come at it more qualitatively and you say, I need a pickup truck, it's got to get me to work, it's got to do this, it's got to do that, then you believe that the expert advice you're getting back is to meet the need that you outlined in the process. So maybe those are just two slightly different approaches to it, but I think they're easier to communicate. I thought Councillor Ma raised a very good point. I have no interest in us setting our future deliverables for our community because of the challenges of Metro Vancouver or TransLink or other orders of government. But at the same time, we have an obligation to consider it, that impact, because at the same time, we're contemplating increases to ours. Just the wastewater utility bill is going to go up by about $125 per year over the next 5 years, ballpark, or starting not next year, but the year after that. And so we can expect that onboarding to be a fairly significant hit for people. And they don't, I get that we collect for all of the other agencies. People don't see that separation between what Metro is doing and what the district is doing. The other comment, I think that it's important to have a realism debate, a discussion about it. what can we really afford, and what the impacts are going to be on us. Council needs to be the one making the decisions about what goes and doesn't go. And if we leave too much on the table, then it's gonna be staff deciding what goes and doesn't go. There's a limited bandwidth to be able to get work done. And if council doesn't make those tough choices, staff will make those tough choices. And I don't think that is what we want. We don't want to put our staff in that situation. The public expects us to be the decision makers on those things. But it means that we can't be approving everything without the ability to deliver it, because you're going to end up in a situation where the tail will still exist, the projects will still carry over for multiple years, and it will be staff making those decisions rather than council, because just out of necessity. And so it's a difficult decision. You know, we're going to have the discussion with real numbers, with real projects on the table when we get into the fall. But I still got to be made at this table by the council. We can't be putting our staff in that situation where they're telling us, yes, sorry, we just simply can't deliver that because we had to deliver this instead. Mr. Daniel, additional comments?
Your worship, I just wanted to follow up that the options, they did have something attached to it. And the first option was our best available information is this is what we need to maintain the level of service that the community enjoys. I recognize the issue with connecting it to the capital plan, so we'll work on that. In terms of cumulative impacts and other organizations, you're right, it has been our practice to flow through Metro Vancouver charges, but the impact of these charges really, they need to be front and center, and we need to make sure that the public's understanding what that looks like, so gathering facts. And council has in the past pressed us for these cumulative impacts around budget time. They're hard to get, but we're doing our best to make sure that we can inform the community about the upcoming impacts.
I'd just like to add one more off topic, but on the topic of communications regarding the upcoming discussions in the fall. Other communities are doing surveys pre-budget to ask the community, like, what do they want? What would they be comfortable with? And I think that I would really like to see this council do that so that it goes beyond, you know, each of our own anecdotal experience with members of the community and or the few that write us occasionally or often, and get some hard numbers with real surveying. And I think that would be extremely helpful for us making our decisions going forward, but it has to be done early in the process.
Ms. Grafton, if I may ask, about how much time would it take to turn around a survey like that? If once we had the numbers on the costs and we could lay out a few different options, how much time would it take to get that out in the community, get the survey back, and have it be in a functional form for us for decision making?
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
So my best guess at this point, Mayor Little, is that typically we like these surveys to run for about 3 weeks to give people a chance to prepare. And then we like time on the back end to be able to make sure that we're fully assessing the data properly before we present them. So typically we would do a survey in one quarter and then have the report in the following quarter. So typically about a month to prepare, 3 weeks for the survey, and then time at the end for the data collection, depending how the information or the data analysis, I would say, depending on how the information comes to us. So
if we in September in earnest went towards it, we wouldn't be likely to have a usable amount of information until November, December.
Yeah, I would think so.
Sounds long, but it would mean that you're not just getting, you're hopefully getting a broader cross section. But it does interest me. We're midterm this fall. This is the center. October is the middle of our 4-year term, and having a community check in like that, particularly with all the pressures that people are seeing, I think could be effective too.
How do we instruct communications to move forward with that as soon as possible.
You can have a talk with this senior group to see what can be done, and we'll get a response back offline to council. Councillor Back.
I just want, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to add my full support for Councillor Pope's recommendation regarding a survey. I know we have talked about the idea of participatory budgeting in the past and giving the community all the information and saying, you know, look, how would you deal with this challenge or these challenges that we're having? How would you spend that money and how would you prioritize? And so, you know, anything along those lines, I fully support. And I think a survey, you know, could give us a lot of really useful information, and I think we need that, you know, now more than ever to really hear, you know, how the community's feeling and what the challenges are out there.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any further speakers. We still have some time, and our policy is when we have additional time on council workshops, we open up 10 minutes of public input to see if there's anything we missed. We have a couple of online participants and a couple here in the room. Would anybody else like to add their comments to the workshop? I see a virtual attendee, Corey Cost. Corey, can you hear me? Oh, we're just going to move you over as a panelist, Corey. Hi, Corey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and you should be able to see me now.
Can hear you and see you. There you go.
Good. Okay. Lots of numbers flying around and confusion as well on my part, maybe. Sometimes the 1% is included, sometimes it's not. But it's important to clarify exactly what we are talking about. You talked about new revenue sources, but be careful what you wish for, because they sometimes come with obligations. There's just no free rides in this world. That is what I'm trying to say. A statement was made that the infrastructure, our infrastructure, the District of North Vancouver, publicly owned infrastructure, was worth, did I read it or hear it right? $4 billion? A confirmation of what was being said there would be very useful.
That's the value of the roads and the pipes and
Yes.
everything else.
How much is all that worth? I've been desperately trying in the background to find out what it is for each municipality to give some comparison, but I haven't gotten very far. So we're going to continue the 1% for infrastructure. So growth could pay its own way, was a statement that was made. I don't think that's correct. That's not the function of the 1% raising of the infrastructure. So please clarify the statement. Continue 1% for infrastructure, so growth pays its own way. So if you could clarify a couple of those things, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I didn't hear that, but Mr. Danlock, do you have a comment on that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Cost is speaking to one of the lines under the capital plan where it specifically mentions continuing the 1% for the infrastructure or the infrastructure deficit, and also ensuring growth-based separate items.
The 1%, the purpose of the 1% is to, when you have a building or a piece of infrastructure up for renewal, you have the vast majority of the funds already held in reserve for its eventual replacement.
If you live here, yes, but not everywhere.
Okay, any other members of the public wish to add their comments? Seeing none, we've completed the business of the workshop. I'll accept adjournment. Accepted. Thank you very much. Thank you to staff and Mr. Danlock for your presentation today, and look forward to future budget meetings in these challenging times. But we do have a regular council meeting coming up at 7 o'clock, and so we'll have a light stretch, grab a bite to eat or whatever, and we'll be back in the main chamber starting at 7 o'clock. Good night.